The silence in the house was the first thing that became a constant after my husband, Robert, passed away. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket that smelled of stale memories and unspoken grief. Robert and I had built this life, this very house, brick by brick, not literally, but with every extra shift I took at the hospital and every overtime hour he clocked in at the factory. We were planners, savers. Our dream was a quiet retirement, a small RV, and a map of the national parks we never had time to see. We had a ledger, a little black book where we tracked every penny, not out of stinginess, but out of a shared vision for our golden years. That ledger was our Bible. When Robert got sick, the ledger's purpose shifted from tracking dreams to tracking medical bills, co-pays, and prescription costs. We were fortunate. Our careful planning meant we could handle it without going into debt. We owned our home outright, had a decent pension waiting for me, and a savings account that was the culmination of 50 years of disciplined living. When he died, he left me financially secure but emotionally bankrupt. The silence was his absence, a void I didn't know how to fill. My son, Ethan, my only child, seemed to feel the loss just as profoundly. He was my rock during those first few months, a constant presence in the suffocating quiet. He would visit with his wife, Jessica, and their 2 children, Noah and Olivia, and for a few hours, the house would feel alive again, filled with the chaotic energy of a family. I clung to those visits like a drowning woman to a life raft. They were proof that I wasn't entirely alone, that a piece of my world still spun on its axis. About 3 months after the funeral, they came over on a Sunday afternoon. I remember the weak autumn light filtering through the living room windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Ethan sat beside me on the floral sofa, the same one Robert and I had picked out 30 years ago, and took my hand. His hands were strong like his father's, but his touch had a practiced softness I was only just beginning to recognize. "Mom," he began, his voice a low, gentle murmur that I had come to associate with an impending request. "Jess and I have been talking, and we really need to ask you for something important." I braced myself, my heart giving a little flutter of anxiety. I was still new to this role, the matriarch, the sole decision-maker. "Of course, sweetheart. Anything." Jessica, who had been arranging a bouquet of store-bought daisies on the coffee table, turned to me with a smile that was perfectly crafted, all white teeth and crinkling eyes, yet it never quite reached the depths of her gaze. "It's about Olivia's sweet 16, Sarah," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "You know how she is, so sensitive, so artistic. We want to give her a truly special day, a memory that will last a lifetime." Ethan squeezed my hand. "The thing is, Mom, with all the expenses from Dad's funeral, and with my commission being a little slow this quarter, we just can't make the numbers work. It's terrible timing. We feel awful." He looked down at our joined hands, his brow furrowed with what I then believed was genuine worry. I saw my little boy, the one whose scraped knees I had kissed, whose nightmares I had soothed. I didn't see the 40-year-old man with a mortgage and a car payment. "We want to throw her a proper party at the Willows," Jessica continued, naming a notoriously expensive private venue by the lake. "With a DJ and a photo booth, and that chocolate fountain she's been dreaming about. It's a lot." The silence stretched for a moment, pregnant with expectation. I looked at their faces, Ethan's full of manufactured concern, Jessica's a mask of hopeful politeness. I was the solution to their problem. The role was a familiar one, but the currency had changed. It used to be my time, my energy, my love. Now it was my money. "How much are we talking about?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Ethan finally met my eyes. We did the math. To do it right, it would be about $10,000. "I know it's a huge ask, Mom." "A massive one. We would consider it a loan, of course. We'd pay you back within 6 months, I swear. As soon as my big quarter-end commission comes through." $10,000. The number echoed in the quiet room. It was more than the down payment we'd made on this house. It was the cost of a brand-new compact car. It was a significant chunk of the savings Robert and I had bled for. But then I looked at my son's pleading face, and I thought of my granddaughter, Olivia, a quiet, sweet girl who deserved a beautiful memory. And more than anything, I thought about the crushing loneliness that would descend the moment they walked out the door. Saying yes meant keeping them here a little longer. It meant being useful, needed, important. It meant I still had a family that relied on me. My husband was gone. My role as a wife was gone. But my role as a mother, and now a provider, was being solidified. It felt like a promotion I hadn't asked for but was terrified to refuse. Of course, I heard myself say, the words feeling foreign in my own mouth. Of course, I'll help. It's for Olivia. The relief that washed over their faces was instantaneous and almost comical in its intensity. Ethan hugged me tightly, burying his face in my shoulder. Thank you, Mom. You're a lifesaver. You have no idea what this means to us. Jessica's smile finally looked genuine, a predator's smile after a successful hunt. It's just a temporary bridge, Sarah. We'll have it back to you before you know it. We just want Olivia to have a perfect day. I went to the bank the next morning. The teller, a young woman named Maria, looked at me over her glasses as I filled out the transfer slip. That's a generous gift, Mrs. Payne, she commented politely. It's a loan, I corrected her, more for my own benefit than for hers. For my granddaughter's party. She nodded, but her eyes held a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher, pity, perhaps, or a knowing skepticism. I ignored it, signed the paper, and walked out feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and dread. The party was exactly as Jessica had described it, an opulent affair at the Willows, with shimmering lights, a thumping bass from the DJ's speakers, and a towering chocolate fountain that was the centerpiece of the room. Olivia looked beautiful in a pale blue dress, but also overwhelmed, clinging to her friends and rarely cracking a smile. I sat at a small table in the back, a forgotten ornament in a celebration I had single-handedly funded. Ethan and Jessica floated around the room, playing the perfect hosts, accepting compliments on their generosity. They introduced me to a few of their friends as Ethan's mom, and I would smile and nod, feeling more like a distant relative than the guest of honor's grandmother. At one point, I overheard one of Jessica's friends, a woman dripping in gold jewelry, say, "Jess, you guys really went all out. This must have cost a fortune." Jessica laughed, a light, airy sound. "Oh, we just want the best for our little girl. We make it work." The words, so casually deceitful, were like a small, sharp pebble in my shoe. An irritation I couldn't quite shake. I watched my son laugh with his friends, a glass of expensive champagne in his hand, and I felt a chasm opening between us. He looked happy, carefree, as if the $10,000 had been a trivial sum he'd simply forgotten about. And as the night wore on, I realized that's exactly what would happen. They would forget. The 6 months came and went. Ethan's big commission was never mentioned. The loan was never brought up again. I never asked. The silence on that subject was just as heavy, just as suffocating, as the silence that filled my house every night. It was the first entry in a new, unwritten ledger, one that tracked debts not of money, but of love, respect, and honesty. And I, in my desperate need to feel connected, had just authorized the first of many withdrawals, with no expectation of ever being repaid. The pattern had been set. I had shown them that my love and my grief had a price tag, and they had shown me they were more than willing to pay it with my own money. The unspoken $10,000 loan became a ghost in my house, a spectral presence that lingered in the corners of every conversation I had with Ethan and Jessica. It was a testament to my own cowardice. I was afraid that bringing it up would shatter the fragile illusion of family I was paying so dearly to maintain. So I said nothing, and my silence was interpreted as acceptance, as a green light. The next request came just over 6 months later, almost to the day the first loan was supposed to have been repaid. Ethan called me on a weekday morning, his voice laced with a carefully orchestrated panic. "Mom, you're not going to believe this. We've got a huge problem over here. The kitchen is a disaster." He sent me pictures on my phone, a small, dark water stain on the ceiling beneath the upstairs bathroom and a slightly warped cabinet door under the sink. To my untrained eye, it looked minor, but his description painted a scene of impending doom. The plumber came out. He explained breathlessly. He said the pipes are ancient. There's a slow leak, moisture is building up in the walls, and there's a risk of black mold. He said we need to gut the whole kitchen, replace the plumbing and all the cabinets. It's a nightmare, Mom. An absolute nightmare. Jessica got on the extension, her voice trembling with what I now recognize as theatrical despair. Sarah, I'm so worried about the kids' health. Black mold can cause serious respiratory issues. We can't have them living in a hazardous environment. But the quote we got, it's just astronomical. We don't know what we're going to do. They didn't need to say the number. I already knew the conversation was leading to a request. They had laid the foundation of fear, the children's health, a potent weapon against any grandmother, and now they were waiting for me to offer the solution. My own kitchen, the one Robert and I had updated in the late 90s, was perfectly functional. The Formica countertops were a bit dated, and the linoleum was worn in front of the sink, but it was clean, solid, and filled with the warmth of 1,000 shared meals. I thought of Robert, how he'd meticulously caulked the sink himself, how he'd proudly installed the new faucet, his knuckles bruised and scraped. The idea of gutting a room for anything less than a catastrophic failure was alien to me. But this wasn't my house. It was theirs. It was their emergency. What was the quote? I asked, my voice flat. $8,000, Ethan said, the number rolling off his tongue a little too easily. And that's the cheapest one we could find. It's for the plumbing, the new cabinets, the drywall repair, everything. We can pay you back, of course. We'll set up a payment plan. As soon as we get this mess sorted. A payment plan. The ghost of the $10,000 loan laughed silently in the corner. I thought about saying no. The word formed in my mind, a small, hard kernel of resistance. I could say, Ethan, what about the money for Olivia's party? I could say, maybe you should look for a cheaper solution, patch the pipe for now. But then I imagined the aftermath, the hurt silence on the phone, the canceled Sunday visits, the growing distance. The silence in my house was already deafening. I couldn't bear for it to be absolute. So I pushed the kernel of resistance down, deep into the pit of my stomach where it joined the pebble of resentment from the party. I'll transfer the money, I said. Just make sure the work is done properly. The relief in their voices was a familiar refrain. The promises were the same, the gratitude just as effusive and just as temporary. 2 weeks later, Jessica posted photos on social media. A brand new kitchen, not just repaired, but extravagantly remodeled. Gleaming granite countertops, a stainless steel farmhouse sink, a high-end gas range, and custom-built shaker cabinets in a trendy slate gray. The caption read, "Our new dream kitchen." So thrilled with how it turned out. #KitchenReno, #DreamHome, #blessed. There was no mention of a catastrophic leak, no thanks to the mother who had funded the nightmare. It wasn't a repair, it was an upgrade. A luxury upgrade. I looked at the photos and felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. The black mold they had been so worried about seemed to have been a very convenient excuse. I saw my $8,000 in the polished gleam of the granite, in the perfect lines of the custom cabinetry. I had paid for their dream, while my own dreams of an RV and national parks gathered dust in a box with Robert's old maps. The requests began to come more frequently after that, the excuses more elaborate. The transactions became smoother, more routine. I was no longer a person they were asking for a loan. I was a process, a function. I was the family ATM, and they had my PIN. The next major withdrawal was for Jessica's car. Her 7-year-old minivan, according to Ethan, had completely given up the ghost. The transmission was shot, the engine was making a terrible noise, and it was a death trap that she couldn't possibly use to ferry my precious grandchildren around. The mechanic said it would cost more to fix than the car is worth, Ethan told me over the phone, his voice heavy with resignation. We're in a real bind, Mom. Jess needs reliable transportation for the kids. I suggested they look for a reliable used car, something practical and affordable. I even offered to go with them, to help them find a good deal. Jessica's response was swift and sharp. Sarah, with all due respect, I can't be driving Noah and Olivia around in someone else's old junker. We need something safe. Something with a warranty. We found a dealership that's offering a great deal on a certified pre-owned SUV. It's only 3 years old. The great deal was $12,000. Another loan, of course. Another promise of a payment plan that would never materialize. I transferred the money. A week later, I saw Jessica in the grocery store parking lot, loading bags into a brand new, current year model SUV, the kind with leather seats and a panoramic sunroof. It wasn't certified pre-owned. It was top of the line, fresh off the showroom floor. She saw me and her face flushed for a fraction of a second before her perfect smile snapped into place. "Sarah." "Hi. What do you think?" she chirped, patting the hood of the gleaming black vehicle. We ended up getting an amazing deal on a new one. The financing was just too good to pass up. She didn't explain where the extra money had come from. She didn't need to. I knew. I had paid for the down payment, and their too-good-to-pass-up financing would be another monthly burden they'd likely find an excuse to need help with down the line. I just nodded and said, "It's very nice, Jessica." What I wanted to say was, "You lied to me." Again. But the words stuck in my throat, choked by the fear of confrontation, by the desperate, pathetic need to be a part of their shiny, new, life-fueled lives. The biggest blow came when it was time for Noah, my eldest grandson, to go to college. He was a smart boy, and he'd been accepted into the state university, a fine school with a solid reputation and in-state tuition that was manageable. But that wasn't good enough for Jessica. "He has an opportunity to go to a private liberal arts college out of state," she announced during one of their Sunday visits. "It has a much better professor-to-student ratio, and the networking opportunities are unparalleled. The state school is, well, it's a factory. We can't let him settle for that." The price tag for this unparalleled opportunity was staggering. $45,000 a year. Even with some small scholarships, the portion they were responsible for was astronomical. Ethan presented it to me with a full-blown PowerPoint presentation he'd prepared, complete with charts and graphs showing the projected lifetime earnings of graduates from the private college versus the state school. "Mom, this isn't an expense," he argued, his voice full of the passion of a seasoned salesman. "It's an investment. An investment in your grandson's future. We can cover most of it, but we're short about $15,000 a year. We need your help to get him over the finish line for the first 3 years. By his senior year, I'll have had a promotion and we can handle it ourselves. $15,000 a year for 3 years. $45,000. The numbers were becoming so large they felt unreal. This was a huge portion of what Robert and I had saved for our entire lives. This was our security. This was the RV. This was Yellowstone and the Grand Canyon. I looked at Noah, who was sitting quietly, looking uncomfortable. I wondered if he even wanted this. Or was this his mother's dream, another status symbol she could parade in front of her friends? "It's a lot of money, Ethan," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "This is my retirement." Jessica placed a perfectly manicured hand on my arm. Her touch was cold. "We know, Sarah. And we are so grateful for your support. Think of it this way. You're not just investing in Noah. You're investing in the family legacy. You're giving him a foundation that will benefit all of us for generations to come." The family legacy. The words were so grand, so manipulative. They were framing my financial depletion as a noble sacrifice. And I, caught in the headlights of their relentless ambition, found myself nodding. I agreed to pay. With each transfer, a piece of me withered. I was no longer just lonely. I was being hollowed out, my life's work, my husband's legacy, being siphoned away to fund a lifestyle that wasn't mine, to fulfill dreams I didn't share. And with every dollar I gave, the silence from them grew louder. The calls became less frequent unless a payment was due. The visits became shorter, more perfunctory. I had become the invisible support structure holding up their glittering facade, and I was beginning to realize that if I ever stopped, the entire thing would come crashing down, and they would blame me for the rubble. The years following Robert's death blurred into a monotonous cycle of request and transfer. The big-ticket items, the party, the kitchen, the car, the college tuition, were punctuated by a steady stream of smaller financial bleeds. Jessica was a master of the subtle, indirect ask. She never demanded money outright for the smaller things. Instead, she would plant seeds of guilt and inadequacy that I would feel compelled to water with cash. It became a finely tuned performance. She'd call me, her voice dripping with manufactured melancholy. "Oh, Sarah, it's such a shame. Olivia's entire friend group is going on the class trip to Europe this spring. She's trying to be brave about it, but I can tell her heart is broken. But what can you do? $3,000 is just not in the budget for us right now." She would sigh, a long, mournful sound, and I would immediately feel a pang of guilt. Here I was, a woman with a healthy savings account, while my granddaughter was missing out on the trip of a lifetime. The fact that Ethan and Jessica had just spent $500 on a single dinner for their anniversary, an event lavishly documented on social media, never seemed to enter her equation. My money was for necessities like European trips. Their money was for their own enjoyment. I would wait a day so as not to seem too eager, and then I would call back. "Jessica, I'd say I've been thinking about Olivia. I don't want her to miss out. Let me cover the cost of the trip. It will be my gift to her." The feigned surprise in her voice was always perfectly pitched. "Oh, Sarah, are you sure? We couldn't possibly let you do that. It's too much." "Nonsense," I'd insist, falling right into her trap. "I want to do it." And just like that, another $3,000 would flow from my account to theirs. This scenario repeated itself with numbing regularity. There was the $2,000 membership to the country club pool, because all the kids' friends belong and it's so important for them to have a safe, supervised place to socialize in the summer. There was the $1,000 set of custom golf clubs for Noah, because he'd shown a real talent and needed the right equipment to take his game to the next level. There were endless smaller amounts for designer dresses for school dances, expensive tickets to concerts, and pricey tutoring sessions for subjects the kids were supposedly struggling in, though their report cards always seemed fine. Each request was wrapped in the language of love, of opportunity, of parental concern. To deny them would have been to declare myself a grandmother who didn't care, a mother who was unsupportive. They had painted me into a corner, and the only way out seemed to be through my checkbook. My neighbor, Helen, a sharp-witted widow who lived in the apartment next to mine, began to notice the pattern long before I was willing to admit it existed. Helen had been my rock since Robert died. She would show up with a hot casserole when she knew I hadn't eaten, or drag me out for a walk when I wanted to wallow in my grief. She had a no-nonsense attitude that I both admired and feared. One afternoon, she found me sitting at my kitchen table, staring blankly at a bank statement. Another withdrawal from the First National Bank of Ethan and Jessica, she asked wryly, pouring herself a cup of coffee without being asked. I tried to deflect. It was for Noah. He needed a new laptop for his college classes. Helen sat down opposite me, her gaze unwavering. "Sarah, the boy got a brand new MacBook Pro for high school graduation 2 years ago. I know because you told me you paid for it. What happened to that one?" He said it was running slow, and the new software for his engineering classes requires a more powerful processor, I recited, the excuse sounding flimsy even to my own ears. Helen just shook her head, a sad smile playing on her lips. "Honey, they're playing you like a fiddle. You know that, right?" The directness of her words stung. "They're my family, Helen. They're just having a tough time." "A tough time," she scoffed. "I saw Jessica's new SUV last week. The one with the sticker price that's more than my first house. I saw her posts from that spa weekend she took with her friends last month. That doesn't look like a tough time to me. It looks like they're living the high life on your dime." I felt a flush of anger, a defensive instinct to protect my son. "You don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," she retorted, her voice softening slightly. "I understand that you're a good mother who loves her son. And I understand that he and his grifter wife are exploiting that love for every penny it's worth. You're not helping them, Sarah. You're enabling them. There's a difference." Her words stayed with me, echoing in the silence of my apartment long after she had gone home. I knew she was right, but admitting it felt like a betrayal. Admitting it meant acknowledging that the relationship I had with my son was transactional, that my worth in his eyes was directly tied to my bank balance. It was a truth too painful to face, so I pushed it down, burying it under a fresh layer of denial. The red flags were everywhere, waving violently in the wind, but I chose to be blind. One Saturday, I decided to surprise them with a visit. I baked Robert's favorite apple pie and drove to their house, a sprawling two-story home in a new suburban development, a house I now realized my money had helped secure the down payment for, under the guise of an urgent real estate investment opportunity. A few years back, as I pulled up, I saw a large landscaping truck parked in their driveway. Men were unloading paving stones and planting mature, expensive-looking shrubs. Jessica was outside, directing them, pointing to where she wanted a new stone walkway installed. She was wearing designer workout clothes and holding a tablet. She looked less like a woman having a tough time and more like the CEO of a small corporation. When she saw my car, her face froze for a moment. "Sarah, what a surprise," she said, walking over. Her smile was tight. "I was just getting some quotes for a little landscaping work. The front yard has been looking so bare." "It looks like more than a quote," I observed, gesturing to the men already digging up the lawn. "Oh well, this company had a last-minute cancellation and offered us a huge discount if we could start today," she said breezily. It was too good to pass up. The phrase was familiar. It was the same one she'd used for the new SUV. It was their go-to excuse for any extravagant purchase they couldn't justify. I held up the pie. "I brought dessert." "How sweet," she said, taking it from me without making eye contact. "But now isn't a great time, actually. The house is a mess with all this work going on. We'll have to get together another time." She didn't invite me in. She took my pie, made an excuse, and effectively dismissed me from her perfectly manicured curb. I drove home with a hollow feeling in my chest. The smell of the apple pie lingered in my car, a sweet, sickening reminder of my own naivete. I was good enough to fund the stone walkway, but not good enough to be invited inside to see it. Another time, I was on a video call with Olivia. She was in her dorm room, and in the background, I could see a pile of shopping bags from high-end boutiques. "Looks like you had a fun shopping trip," I commented lightly. Olivia's eyes widened, and she quickly tried to move the bags out of the camera's view. "Oh, that's nothing," she mumbled. "Mom just got me a few things for the new semester." A few things. I had just transferred $2,000 to Ethan the week before because he'd told me Olivia's meal plan had run out of money and she was practically starving. I swallowed my questions. I didn't want to put my granddaughter in the middle of it. But the image of those expensive shopping bags was seared into my mind. I was funding her food emergency while her mother was buying her designer clothes. The loneliness was the worst part. It was a constant ache, a physical presence in my life. I had poured so much of myself, my time, my emotional energy, and a staggering amount of money into this family, and yet I felt more disconnected from them than ever. The visits I had once craved became sources of anxiety. I would find myself bracing for the inevitable request, the sad story that would always precede it. The conversations were superficial, devoid of any real intimacy. They would ask how I was doing, but their eyes would glaze over before I could finish my answer. They weren't interested in my life. They were interested in my ability to finance theirs. I was a ghost in my own family, an invisible benefactor whose only purpose was to sign the checks. And my greatest fear, the one that kept me up at night, was that if the money ever stopped, I would cease to exist for them altogether. So I kept giving, not out of love anymore, but out of a desperate, terrifying fear of being utterly and completely alone. The emotional distance between us grew into a vast, unbridgeable canyon. The phone calls from Ethan, once a source of comfort, now came with a Pavlovian sense of dread. I could tell within the first 10 seconds what the purpose of the call was. If his tone was warm and chatty, asking about my day or my health, I knew it was the preamble to a significant financial request. If his tone was rushed and perfunctory, it was usually a smaller, more urgent need, a utility bill they'd forgotten to pay, or an unexpected school fee. I started to feel like a subject in a cruel experiment, and my only role was to be predictably generous. The Sundays they used to dedicate to visiting me dwindled to once a month, then to a quick, obligatory drop-in on their way to somewhere more important. They would sweep into my quiet apartment, bringing a storm of chaotic energy, their phones buzzing incessantly. Jessica would immediately start rearranging my throw pillows or commenting on the dust on a bookshelf, subtle territorial markings in a home that was no longer a sanctuary, but a resource center. "Mom, you look tired," Ethan would say, giving me a hug that felt more like a brief, professional handshake. "You should really think about hiring a cleaning service. We know a great one." The suggestion wasn't born of concern for my well-being, it was a criticism of my housekeeping and a prelude. In the same breath, he'd mention, "Speaking of which, the property taxes are due, and we're a little short this year." It's an absolute killer. He had a genius for making his personal financial mismanagement sound like a universal, unavoidable catastrophe. He never said, "I want." It was always, "We need." The "we" was a shield, a way to distribute the blame and magnify the urgency. It was never for him. It was for the family, for the kids' future, for maintaining stability. The justifications were always plausible, always emotionally charged. "Mom, Olivia needs braces, and the orthodontist says her bite is causing jaw pain. If we don't do it now, it's going to lead to major problems down the road. Mom, there are some leaks around the chimney, and the roofer said if we don't replace the whole roof now, we risk major water damage to the attic this winter. It's a safety issue." Every argument was airtight, a perfectly constructed cage of logic and emotional blackmail. And I, who had spent 50 years of my life working diligently, first as a certified nursing assistant and then in hospital housekeeping roles that taught me the value of a dollar earned through sheer hard work, would open my accounts and authorize the transfers. Each time, a piece of my self-respect chipped away. I was funding a lifestyle of manufactured emergencies. I had become so conditioned to their patterns that I started to anticipate the requests. If I saw a social media post about them attending a fancy wedding, I knew that within a week, I'd get a call about a sudden car repair. If Jessica posted pictures of a new designer handbag, it would be followed by a story about how Noah unexpectedly needed $500 for textbooks. It was as if they believed their spending had no consequences because I would always be there to absorb them. The most painful realization was how they were raising my grandchildren. Noah and Olivia were good kids at heart, but they were being taught a toxic lesson, that love is transactional, and that their grandmother was not a person to be cherished, but a resource to be tapped. They learned to approach me with a specific kind of affection, an exaggerated warmth that usually preceded a request they'd been coached to make. "Grandma Sarah," Olivia would say, calling me on her own, a rare event. "I was just thinking about you. How are you?" After a few minutes of pleasantries, the real reason for the call would emerge. "So, my phone is super old, and the battery dies all the time. Mom said you might be able to help me get a new one for my birthday?" I would say yes, of course, and the warmth in her voice would instantly amplify. "Oh, thank you, Grandma. You're the best." Then, the call would end, and I wouldn't hear from her again until the next time she needed something. I wasn't teaching her about my life or sharing my wisdom. I was teaching her that I could be manipulated with a few sweet words. I was complicit in my own exploitation. I started testing them in small ways. For my birthday one year, I mentioned to Ethan that I'd love a specific digital photo frame, one that would allow them to send pictures of the kids directly to my living room. It was a simple request, a way to feel more connected. On my birthday, they showed up with a generic scented candle and a card. "We saw this and thought of you," Jessica said with a bright smile. The photo frame was never mentioned again. Yet, a week later, Ethan called to ask for $1,500 to fix their central air conditioning unit, which had suddenly died during a heat wave. I paid, and they had it fixed the next day. A digital photo frame was too much trouble, but a $1,500 request was business as usual. The incident that should have been my wake-up call, the one that screamed the truth in my face, happened about a year before everything finally imploded. Jessica's parents, David and Karen Miller, were celebrating their 45th wedding anniversary. Jessica was planning a big celebratory dinner at a fancy downtown restaurant. I learned about it by accident, through a stray comment Olivia made during a brief FaceTime call. "Grandma, I can't talk long," she'd said, looking flustered. "We're all getting ready for Grandpa and Grandma Miller's big party tonight." A sharp, cold pain shot through my stomach. Grandpa and Grandma Miller. As if I didn't exist. As if Robert's memory, their other grandfather, meant nothing. I was a grandmother, too. I was family. Or was I? That evening, the silence in my apartment felt particularly malevolent. I pictured them all there, Ethan, Jessica, the kids, David, and Karen laughing, toasting, celebrating. A perfect family portrait with a gaping hole where I was supposed to be. I waited until the next day to call Ethan, my voice carefully neutral. "Son, Olivia mentioned a dinner last night for the Millers." There was a beat of awkward silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head as he formulated a lie. "Oh yeah, Mom. That? It was just a small thing, really intimate. You know how Jessica's family is, very tight-knit. We didn't want you to feel uncomfortable or out of place." Uncomfortable. Out of place. I was his mother. He was telling me I didn't belong with my own family. The excuse was so flimsy, so insulting, it was almost worse than not being invited at all. He was suggesting he was protecting me from feeling excluded by actively excluding me. The absurdity of it was breathtaking. "I see," I said, my voice hollow. "Well, I hope you all had a lovely time." I hung up the phone before he could reply, before I started screaming. I didn't feel bad. I felt invisible. It was a new level of erasure. I had always known that Jessica favored her own parents, that I was the other grandmother. But I had never realized that Ethan was complicit in this hierarchy. He had chosen his wife's family over his own mother. Again, I swallowed the humiliation. Again, I pretended to understand. Again, I told myself that making a scene would only make things worse, would only push them further away. I didn't realize they were already gone, that the son I knew had been replaced by a stranger who saw me as an obligation and a bank account, in that order. The rage and hurt from that night simmered just below the surface for weeks, a dormant volcano waiting for the final eruption. I was still grieving the man my son used to be, while the man he had become continued to bleed me dry. The anniversary dinner incident left a scar. For the first time, the pain was not just about the money, it was about a deliberate, calculated act of exclusion. It was a clear message. You are the ATM, not a cherished family member. You are welcome to fund our lives, but you are not welcome in them. This new, sharper pain made me start to question everything. I began to see their actions not as individual instances of thoughtlessness, but as a coordinated, long-term strategy of emotional and financial manipulation. I was a resource they were managing, and keeping me slightly isolated, needy, and grateful for whatever scraps of attention they threw my way was part of that management. 2 weeks after the anniversary dinner, right on schedule, Ethan appeared at my door. He didn't call first. He knew that showing up in person, his face etched with worry, was far more effective. He looked exhausted, his shoulders slumped. It was a masterful performance. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something serious," he said, his voice low and grave. He sat on the edge of the sofa, the same spot where he'd made his first plea for Olivia's party years ago. He clasped his hands between his knees, a portrait of a man burdened by the weight of the world. "The company is going through a major restructuring," he began, his gaze fixed on the floor. "There are going to be significant layoffs. My department is one of the ones being hit. I don't know for sure if my job is safe, Mom." He paused, letting the gravity of the statement sink in. He knew my greatest fear, born from a lifetime of financial insecurity, was unemployment. He was striking at the very core of my anxieties. "Jessica is a complete wreck," he continued, his voice cracking slightly. "She's trying to stay strong for the kids, but I can see the fear in her eyes. We have to maintain stability for them, no matter what happens. We need a safety net, a financial cushion that will let us get through the next few months if the worst happens." I listened, my heart pounding in my chest. This was different. This wasn't a party or a kitchen. This was his livelihood, my grandchildren's security. He was playing his trump card. He finally looked up, his eyes wide and pleading, the same look he'd given me as a child when he'd broken a lamp and was begging for forgiveness. "Could you lend us $20,000? The number hung in the air, a monstrous sum that sucked all the oxygen out of the room. It was more than he had ever asked for at once. It was a third of my remaining savings. "Ethan, that's so much money," I stammered, my voice trembling. A part of me, the small, sane part that was still fighting for survival, was screaming no. It was screaming that this was a lie, another manipulation. But the larger part, the part conditioned by years of saying yes, was already succumbing to the fear he had so expertly instilled. I know, Mom. Believe me, if there was any other way, I wouldn't be here, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I hate asking you. It makes me feel like a failure. But you're our only hope. You've always been our safety net. Please. Our safety net. Not our mother, not a person. A financial instrument. A featureless, emotionless mechanism designed to catch them when they fell from the heights of their own fiscal irresponsibility. Yet, despite the coldness of the term, it worked. The scared little boy in his eyes melted my resolve. The primal, maternal instinct to protect my child from harm overrode every rational thought in my head. Once again, I gave in. The next morning was a Tuesday. I remember the date, the weather, the crisp autumn air. It felt like a significant day, a turning point. I had to go to the bank in person to authorize a transfer of that size. The teller was Maria, the same young woman who had helped me with the first transfer for Olivia's party all those years ago. She had a few more lines around her eyes now, but her gaze was just as sharp. When she saw the amount on the form, her professional smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Are you sure about this, Mrs. Payne? She asked, her voice quiet and confidential. It's a very large sum. It's for my family, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I felt a need to justify it, to make it sound noble. My son might be losing his job. She nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. Of course. Would you like me to read you the account balance before or after the transfer? It was a subtle, professional jab, her way of forcing me to confront the reality of what I was doing. After, I mumbled, not wanting to see the damage in real time. She processed the transaction. Okay, it's done, she said, sliding the receipt across the counter. I glanced at the new balance. The number was shockingly low. I felt a wave of dizziness. Years of scrimping and saving, of packing lunches and mending clothes, of Robert working double shifts until his back ached, all of it was draining away into the black hole of my son's life. I've seen this before, Maria said softly, so low that only I could hear. With my own grandmother. Please, just be careful. Her unexpected kindness was almost my undoing. I felt my eyes well up with tears. I mumbled a thank you and hurried out of the bank before I completely fell apart. I walked home, the receipt crumpled in my fist. Maria's words echoed in my head, please, just be careful. But it was too late for careful. I had already driven off the cliff. Ethan called that afternoon, his voice buoyant with relief. Thank you, Mom. I can't tell you what a weight you've lifted off our shoulders. We can breathe again. I promise you, this is temporary. As soon as this whole layoff scare is over, I'll start paying you back in full. I swear on Dad's memory. He swore on his father's memory. The man who had worked his fingers to the bone to save that very money. The sacrilege of it made me feel physically ill. I hung up the phone, not with the warm feeling of being a helpful mother, but with the cold, sick feeling of having been thoroughly conned. And then, a strange and unsettling silence began. The following 2 months were the quietest I had experienced since Robert's death. Ethan's daily panicked texts stopped. Jessica's social media, usually a flurry of activity, went dormant. When I tried to call, Ethan was always in a meeting or on his way out the door. His texts became short and generic. All good, Mom. Just swamped at work. When I tried to video call the grandkids, they were always conveniently busy with homework, sports practice, or friends. I was being ghosted. The horrible sensation of being a nuisance, an interruption in their important lives, settled over me. They had what they wanted. The $20,000 was their cushion, and now they didn't need the safety net anymore. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was punitive. It was the silence of a completed transaction. My function had been served, and I was now being put back on the shelf until the next emergency. The loneliness I had been trying to stave off with my money came rushing back, more powerful and more painful than ever before. I had paid an exorbitant price for their company, and all I had bought was a deeper, more profound isolation. I would sit in my silent apartment, staring at the phone, wondering if this was my life now, a series of expensive, transactional interactions followed by long stretches of being utterly forgotten. The truth was slowly dawning on me, a cold, gray light seeping through the cracks of my denial. I hadn't been helping my family. I had been paying a ransom to kidnappers who had taken my son. The silence stretched into a third month, a vast, empty expanse in my life. The quiet in my apartment no longer felt like a simple absence of sound. It felt like a presence, a malevolent entity that mocked my solitude. I found myself talking to Robert's photograph, a habit I had abandoned years ago. "What would you do, Bob?" I'd whisper to his smiling face. "You'd never have let it get this far. You would have seen them for what they are." But he wasn't there, and I was alone with the consequences of my own weakness. It was Helen, my neighbor, who finally dragged me out of my self-imposed prison. She knocked on my door one afternoon and didn't wait for an answer, just walked in carrying 2 mugs of tea. "All right, Sarah, pity party's over," she announced, setting a mug in front of me. "I haven't seen you leave this apartment in a week. You look like a ghost. What's going on?" The dam of my composure finally broke. The tears I had been holding back for months, for years, came in a hot, messy flood. Through my sobs, I told her everything. The $20,000, the layoff story, and the crushing silence that had followed. I told her about the anniversary dinner, the landscaping, the constant, draining requests. I confessed my deepest fear, that I had traded my life savings for a counterfeit version of family. Helen listened patiently, her expression hardening with every word I spoke. She didn't interrupt, she didn't offer platitudes. She just let me empty myself of all the poison I had been swallowing. When I finally finished, exhausted and raw, she reached across the table and took my hand. Her grip was firm, grounding. "Okay," she said, her voice devoid of pity, filled instead with a steely resolve. "So that's the truth of it. You're not a mother to them anymore. You're a bank. And you know what banks do when people stop making deposits? They close the account." Her words were harsh, but they were also a lifeline. She wasn't coddling me, she was validating my anger. She was giving me permission to feel something other than hurt and loneliness. "But how, Helen?" I whispered. "He's my son. He stopped being just your son a long time ago," she said gently. "He's a grown man who is using you. And his wife is the ringleader. You don't owe them your ruin, Sarah. You gave him life, you raised him. You don't owe him your last dime and your last shred of dignity." That conversation planted a seed. It was a tiny, fragile seed of rebellion in the barren soil of my resignation. For the first time, I began to consider a different future, one that didn't involve waiting by the phone for the next manufactured crisis. I started to think about what I wanted. It was a foreign concept. My wants had been sublimated for so long, first to the needs of my husband and our shared goals, and then to the endless demands of my son and his family. I took out a notebook and a pen, and at the top of the page I wrote, "What does Sarah want?" I stared at the blank page for almost an hour. The first thing I wrote was, to travel. I thought of the box of Robert's old maps, of the national parks we were supposed to see. I wrote down Yellowstone, the Grand Canyon, Yosemite. Then I got bolder. Italy, Greece, Ireland. I started writing down smaller things. To take a painting class. To join a book club. To plant a garden on my balcony. To buy a new dress that isn't beige or gray. As I wrote, something shifted inside me. Each word was a small act of reclamation, a declaration that I was a person with dreams and desires independent of my family. I was more than a mother, more than a grandmother, and certainly more than an ATM. I was Sarah. And Sarah wanted to live. A week after my conversation with Helen, a small but significant event occurred. It was Noah's 21st birthday. My eldest grandson, now a junior in the expensive private college I was funding. I had bought his gift a month in advance, a beautiful, classic watch, something I hoped he would keep forever. It was far more expensive than I should have afforded, another pathetic attempt to buy my way into his affection. I called Ethan to ask what time I should come over for the family celebration. His response was a familiar, awkward silence. "Oh, Mom," he said, his voice strained. "Noah just wants to do something small this year, you know, just with his friends from college. It's a whole big bar-hopping thing. You know how young people are." Another exclusion. Another party I wasn't invited to. I was good enough to pay for his college, but not good enough to raise a glass to him on his 21st birthday. But this time, something different happened. The usual wave of hurt was there, but it was accompanied by a new feeling, a cold, clear rage. "That's fine, Ethan," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I have a gift for him. When would be a good time for me to drop it off?" "Oh, don't worry about that," he said quickly, a little too quickly. "I can swing by your place tomorrow and pick it up. No need for you to make a special trip." He didn't want me coming to his house. He didn't want me to see the preparations for the party I wasn't invited to. The rage solidified into ice. "All right, son," I said. "I'll see you tomorrow." I hung up the phone, and I did something I had never done before. I walked to my laptop, opened my banking website, and for the first time, I systematically went through the last 8 years of statements. I had always been afraid to see the final tally, afraid to quantify the full extent of my foolishness. But that night, I needed to know. I needed the cold, hard numbers. I created a spreadsheet, just like Robert would have done. My fingers flew across the keyboard, a grim accountant tallying up my own destruction. Olivia's Sweet 16, $10,000. Kitchen remodel, $8,000. Jessica's SUV, $12,000. Noah's college, 3 years, $45,000. Roof repair, $7,000. Olivia's Europe trip, $3,000. Country club membership, $2,000. I kept going, adding in the smaller amounts, the laptops, the golf clubs, the dental work for which I never saw a bill, the endless emergencies that were never questioned. I dug through old emails and text messages, cross-referencing dates and amounts. It took me 3 hours. When I was finished, I clicked the sum button at the bottom of the column. The number that appeared on the screen seemed to glow with a malevolent light. $62,300. In 8 years, I had given my son and his family $62,300. I stared at the figure until the numbers blurred. It was more than half of what Robert and I had saved over a lifetime. It was my security. It was my future. And it was gone. And what did I have to show for it? An empty apartment. A phone that never rang with good news. Grandchildren who saw me as a means to an end. A son who treated me with a casual contempt that broke my heart a little more each day. I closed the laptop. The volcano of rage that had been simmering inside me for weeks finally erupted, not in a fiery explosion, but in a quiet, chilling flow of icy resolve. A steel door slammed shut in my chest, and the part of me that had always hoped, always forgiven, always made excuses, was locked behind it forever. I did not cry. I did not scream. I felt a profound and terrifying clarity. I finally understood the difference between helping and being used, between love and manipulation, between family and a parasitic dependency. And I knew, with an absolute certainty that settled deep in my bones, that it was over. The First National Bank of Sarah Payne was about to be permanently closed. The weeks following my grim accounting were a period of strange, quiet transformation. Outwardly, nothing had changed. I still went through the motions of my solitary life. But inwardly, I was a different woman. The fog of grief, loneliness, and obligation had lifted, replaced by the sharp, clear air of purpose. I was no longer a victim waiting for the next blow. I was a strategist planning a campaign. My first move was to protect what little I had left. I made an appointment with a financial advisor, a woman Helen had recommended. Her name was Mrs. Gable, a stern, no-nonsense woman in her late 60s with piercing blue eyes. I sat in her office and, for the second time in my life, I told the whole story, but this time without tears. I laid out the numbers from my spreadsheet, the lies, the manipulations. She listened without a flicker of judgment on her face. When I was done, she simply said, "Well, it's time to build a fortress. And you, Sarah, are going to be the queen inside it." Over the next 2 weeks, she helped me restructure everything. We moved my remaining savings into a new account at a different bank, an account Ethan didn't even know existed. We set up a new trust, reviewed my will, and created a firm, impenetrable financial wall around me. The joint account I still shared with Ethan, the one he occasionally deposited his paycheck into before Jessica immediately spent it, and the one I used for the transfers remained open for now. It was a piece of bait. It was the final, crucial part of my plan. I felt a sense of power I hadn't experienced in years. I was taking control, not just of my money, but of my life. The fear of being alone was still there, a faint hum in the background, but it was being drowned out by the rising crescendo of my own self-respect. Then came the phone call that set the final act in motion. It was a Saturday afternoon. Ethan's voice on the phone was unnaturally casual, relaxed. It was the voice he used when he thought he was being clever. "Hey, Mom," he said. "Just wanted to give you a heads up on something." We had been planning a big family cruise for this summer, a real blowout trip to the Caribbean. But with the economy the way it is, and things still being a little uncertain at my job, we've decided we have to cancel it. I felt a familiar cold dread mixed with a new, sharp curiosity. A cruise. This was the first I was hearing of it. "What cruise, son?" I asked, my voice a perfect imitation of mild interest. "You never mentioned it to me." "Oh, well, it was kind of a last-minute idea, Jess, and he said smoothly. "We were actually going to surprise you with it. But, it's better to be responsible. No sense in going into debt for a vacation right now. We'll just have a quiet summer at home. Maybe we'll postpone it until next year when things are better." Surprise me. The lie was so blatant, so insulting. But I played along, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm of cold fury. "That's probably for the best, son." "It's always wise to be prudent," I said, the words feeling like marbles in my mouth. We hung up, and I stared at the phone. Something in his tone, in the overly detailed and unsolicited explanation, set off every alarm bell in my head. This wasn't a canceled trip. This was another story, another performance. And I, for the first time, was not the intended audience. I was the obstacle they were managing. I decided to give him the rope. I decided to believe him, or at least, to pretend to. It was the final test, the last chance for him to be the son I remembered instead of the man he had become. The summer began. I spent the days in a strange state of limbo. I joined a book club at the local library, as I'd written on my list. I bought soil and pots and planted a small herb garden on my balcony. I was taking the steps to build a new life, but a part of me was still tethered to the old one, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Helen was my constant companion. "You're living in pause, Sarah," she told me one afternoon as we sat on my balcony, the scent of fresh basil in the air. "You're waiting for the proof. Don't let waiting consume you." She was right. I was holding my breath, anticipating the betrayal I knew was coming. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks of near total silence from Ethan and his family. Not a call, not a text. Nothing. I told myself they were busy, that they were working hard, saving money, having the quiet summer at home they had described. But deep down, in the place where my new, hard-won clarity lived, I knew it was a lie. The feeling was a persistent unease, a cold stone in the pit of my stomach. It was the feeling you get when you know you're being watched, when you know something is happening just out of your line of sight. The proof arrived on a Thursday afternoon. I was in the kitchen, half-heartedly chopping vegetables for a soup I had no appetite for. My phone buzzed with a notification. It was from Instagram, an app one rarely opened. I had only installed it to see the occasional photo of my grandchildren, the sanitized, happy snippets of their lives they chose to share with the world. Some instinct, some cosmic nudge toward a painful but necessary truth, made me open the app. The first thing I saw was a new post from Jessica. It had been uploaded 20 minutes ago. My heart began to pound, a frantic, trapped bird against my ribs. I tapped on her profile, and my world tilted on its axis. The first photo was of Jessica, standing on the deck of a massive cruise ship. The turquoise expanse of the Caribbean Sea stretched out behind her. She was wearing an expensive-looking coral-colored dress, her hair blowing in the sea breeze, a pair of oversized designer sunglasses perched on her nose. Her smile was radiant, triumphant. The caption, a single, brutal sentence, read, "Unforgettable family vacation in the sun. Sun #blessed #family time #Caribbean dream." My breath caught in my throat. I swiped. The next photo was of Ethan. He was wearing a crisp white linen shirt, his skin tanned, a cocktail with a tiny paper umbrella in his hand. He was grinning, a wide, carefree smile that I hadn't seen in years. He did not look like a man worried about layoffs. He looked like a man without a single care in the world. I kept swiping, each photo a fresh stab in my heart. There were Noah and Olivia by the ship's pool, sporting straw hats with designer logos I knew cost a fortune. There was a photo of them all at dinner in what was clearly an elegant, five-star restaurant, complete with white tablecloths and gleaming silverware. And then the final, soul-crushing blow. A group photo. Ethan, Jessica, Noah, Olivia. And standing right beside them, their arms linked, glasses of champagne raised in a toast, were Jessica's parents, David and Karen Miller. Everyone was there. The whole, perfect, unforgettable family. Everyone but me. I felt the air leave my lungs in a single, silent gasp. My hands started to shake so violently that I almost dropped the phone. It wasn't just a lie. It was a conspiracy. They had planned this. They had created an elaborate fiction about canceling the trip, a story designed specifically to placate me, to keep the ATM operational while they lived a life of luxury they had not earned. They hadn't canceled the trip. They had only canceled my invitation. I was not family. I was the sponsor. Chantel's parents, they were family. They deserved to be there, to be in the photos, to share in the unforgettable memories. I, the woman who had likely paid for a significant portion of the very tickets they were using, was not worthy of inclusion. I was a secret. A shameful, necessary secret. The soup on the stove began to boil over, the hissing sound snapping me back to a semblance of reality. I stumbled over, turned off the burner, and leaned against the counter, my legs too weak to hold me. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, it was almost sublime in its cruelty. And the worst part, the part that truly hollowed me out, was the public nature of it. They had posted it for the whole world to see. They knew I followed Jessica on Instagram. They knew there was a chance I would see it. And they simply didn't care. Or perhaps, and this thought was even more devastating, I was so irrelevant to them, so completely off their radar, that the possibility of me seeing it never even crossed their minds. I was not a person to be considered. I was a problem that had been temporarily solved with a phone call and a lie. In that moment, sitting on my cold kitchen floor, the smell of burnt soup filling the air, the woman I used to be died a final, definitive death. There would be no more second chances, no more benefit of the doubt, no more excuses. The steel door in my chest wasn't just closed, it was welded shut, bolted, and barricaded. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to call them and give them the satisfaction of a dramatic confrontation. I was going to do something far colder, far more effective. I was going to wait. They would come back from their unforgettable vacation, their pockets empty and their credit cards maxed out. And sooner or later, they would need something. They always needed something. And I would be ready. The war had been declared, and they didn't even know it yet. The 3 weeks they were gone were the longest and shortest of my life. Time seemed to warp, with hours dragging by in agonizing slowness, while the days flew past in a blur of quiet, methodical preparation. I did not wallow. I did not weep. The shock and pain had crystallized into something else entirely, a diamond-hard resolve that was cold to the touch. I became an intelligence agent gathering evidence for a trial that would take place only in my own mind. Every day I opened Instagram. It was a form of self-flagellation, but a necessary one. I documented every post. Jessica was prolific, a one-woman tourism board for their lavish lifestyle. There was a photo of the gourmet lobster dinner with the caption, "Living our best life." There was a video of Ethan and Jessica taking a salsa dancing class on the Lido deck, laughing as if they hadn't a care in the world. There was a shot of the children on a jet ski, an excursion I knew from a quick online search cost $400 for an hour. I saved screenshots of everything. I zoomed in on details. The name of the cruise line on a life preserver, a high-end, luxury carrier, the labels on the wine bottles, expensive, the designer logos on their clothes, extravagant. I created a new file on my computer, a digital dossier of their deceit. Each photo was a nail in the coffin of the relationship I once thought we had. With each saved image, my heart hardened a little more. I was no longer looking at pictures of my family. I was looking at evidence of a long con, and I was the mark. I mentally calculated the cost of their unforgettable vacation. A conservative estimate, based on the cruise line's website for a 7-day Caribbean tour in 2 balcony cabins, plus onboard expenses, excursions, and shopping, put the total somewhere north of $15,000. And this, just a few months after they had extracted $20,000 from me for a layoff emergency. The audacity was breathtaking. They hadn't just lied to me, they had stolen from me and used the proceeds to fund a luxury trip with the very people they had chosen over me. Helen came over every other day, a silent, steadying presence. She would look at my face and know that I didn't need comforting words. She needed to witness my transformation. One evening, I showed her the file on my computer, the slideshow of their sun-drenched, life-fueled happiness. She watched it all in silence, her lips pressed into a thin, angry line. When it was over, she simply said, "Good. Let the anger keep you warm. It's time for them to learn what the word consequence means." During this time, I finalized my plan. It wasn't enough to just say no next time. That would lead to arguments, pleas, and a long, drawn-out emotional battle that I no longer had the energy for. I needed to act decisively. I needed to cauterize the wound. My plan had 2 phases. Phase 1 was the cutoff. Phase 2 was the silence. Mrs. Gable, my financial advisor, had already helped me build the fortress. My real money was safe. The joint account was the sacrificial lamb, the last vestige of the old system. Closing it would be the declaration of war. I rehearsed the conversation with the bank teller in my mind. I practiced my signature. I visualized myself walking out of that bank free. The hardest part was preparing for the inevitable confrontation with Ethan. He wouldn't take this lying down. He would come at me with anger, with guilt, with accusations. He would try to twist the narrative, to paint me as the villain, the cruel, unloving mother. I needed to be ready. I wrote down the key facts on a small index card: the total amount of money, $62,300, the date of the layoff request, the dates of the cruise. I wrote down the lies he had told me. I wanted the facts to be my armor. I also prepared my final statement. I knew I couldn't get drawn into a long, circular argument. I needed one simple, irrefutable response. I practiced it in front of the mirror until I could say it without my voice shaking. Ask your wife's family. For words. For small, simple words that would dismantle the entire power structure of our relationship. It was a rejection not just of his request, but of his entire worldview. It told him that I knew about the cruise, that I knew he had chosen them over me, and that I was now formally recognizing that choice. If they were his family, then they could be his bank. The day their cruise was scheduled to end, I felt a strange calm descend over me. The waiting was almost over. I knew, with the certainty of a seasoned hunter, that my prey would be walking into the trap soon. They would return home, tanned and relaxed, to a pile of bills and maxed-out credit cards. The post-vacation reality check would hit hard and fast. And then, my phone would ring. I counted the days. 1 day post-cruise. 2 days. 3. The silence was deafening. I imagined them unpacking, sorting through their souvenirs, ignoring the looming financial disaster for as long as possible. On the morning of the 4th day, a Tuesday, it happened. My phone vibrated on the nightstand at precisely 7:15 a.m. A text message from Ethan. My heart gave a single, hard thud, not of anxiety, but of adrenaline. The moment had arrived. I took a deep breath, opened the message, and read the words I knew were coming. "Mom, I urgently need $6,000. Had an issue with the credit card company. It's a mess. I'll pay you back next month." It was perfect in its sheer, unadulterated arrogance. No, hello. No, how have you been for the last 3 weeks? No pretense of a conversation. Just the raw, unfiltered demand. Urgent, as always. A problem that was always someone else's fault. And the casual, throwaway promise to pay you back next month, a lie so worn out it was transparent. I read the message 5 times, savoring it. Each word was a confirmation, a validation of every decision I had made. He had learned nothing. He still saw me as a function, a utility, a button to be pushed in an emergency. My fingers were surprisingly steady as I typed my reply. I didn't hesitate. I didn't add a single extra word or punctuation mark. ASKYRWIFSFAMLY. I hit send. The message delivered instantly. 1 blue check mark. Then, 2 seconds later, 2 blue check marks. Read. I could almost feel the shockwave travel through the cellular network. I imagined his face, the confident smirk turning to confusion, then to disbelief, then to outright panic. The response was immediate. Less than 30 seconds later, my phone began to ring. Ethan flashed on the screen. I looked at it, and a small, cold smile touched my lips. I pressed the decline button. He called back immediately. Decline. He called a third time. Decline. The calls kept coming, one after another, a frantic, desperate barrage. I let it ring sometimes, just to listen to the sound of his panic. Each rejected call was a victory. Each ignored ring was a brick being laid in the wall of my new life. I counted them. 17 missed calls in the next 2 hours. He was losing control, and it was driving him insane. At noon, a long, rambling text from Jessica arrived. It was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive manipulation. Sarah, I don't know what's gotten into you, but your behavior is incredibly childish and hurtful. Ethan is sick with worry. We are your family. You can't just ignore us. Whatever this is about, it's a misunderstanding. We need to talk like adults. The children are very confused by this silence. The children are confused. The classic move. Using my grandchildren as human shields. I noted, with a kind of detached amusement, that she made no mention of the cruise, no reference to their 3-week absence. In her mind, the only transgression that had occurred was my refusal to comply. I deleted her message without a reply. That afternoon, I put on my best dress, the new one I had bought that wasn't beige, and I went to the bank. I walked up to Maria's window. She recognized me immediately and gave me a small, questioning smile. Good afternoon, Mrs. Payne, she said. I'm here to close a joint account, I announced, my voice clear and strong. And I'd like to cancel all associated cards and block all automatic transfers linked to it. Maria's professional mask slipped, and a look of genuine, triumphant delight flashed in her eyes. I would be very, very happy to help you with that, she said. And as I signed the final form, I felt the last of the chains fall away. The Bank of Sarah Payne was officially, permanently, closed for business. Walking out of the bank that afternoon was like stepping out of a dark, stuffy room into the bright, clean air. I had severed the primary artery of their dependency. It was a surgical strike, clean and decisive. I knew the fallout would be messy, but for the first time in nearly a decade, I felt in control of my own life. When I got home, my phone was a blinking, buzzing hive of their panic. There were now 32 missed calls and a flood of text messages from Ethan, Jessica, and even a confused one from Noah. I sat down with a cup of tea and read through them, not as a wounded mother, but as a military general assessing the enemy's chaotic response to a successful maneuver. None of the messages asked if I was okay. None of them contained an apology. They were all variations on a single theme, demand. They demanded to know what was going on. They demanded an explanation. They demanded that I call them back immediately. They felt entitled to my compliance, even in my rebellion. The final message from Ethan was the most revealing. It read, "Mom, this is beyond ridiculous. You're a grown woman. You can't just throw a tantrum and cut off your family because you're upset about something. Whatever it is, we can talk it through. Call me so we can fix this and get things back to normal." Back to normal. They're normal. A state of affairs where I was a silent, compliant source of funds. He didn't see me as a person who had been wronged. He saw me as a malfunctioning appliance that needed to be fixed. My decision wasn't a valid response to years of exploitation. It was a tantrum. That message solidified my resolve more than any of the angry ones. It showed me he was incapable of seeing me, of understanding the depth of the wound he had inflicted. He thought this was about a single, unknown incident, not the culmination of 1,000 betrayals. I deleted all the messages and turned my phone on silent. The silence was mine now. I owned it. It was no longer a weapon used against me, it was my shield. I knew he would come. He was too arrogant, too used to getting his way, to let this go. He would need to confront me in person, to use his physical presence and his practiced, pleading expressions to force me back into line. I spent the next few days preparing for his arrival. I wrote down my key points on an index card and left it by the door. I rehearsed my calm, firm demeanor. I told Helen what was happening, and she was on standby, ready to come over if I needed backup. He arrived on Saturday morning. I was in the kitchen, watering the herbs on my balcony, when the doorbell rang. It wasn't a polite, neighborly ring. It was a series of long, insistent presses, the sound of impatience and fury. I took a deep breath, glanced at my index card, and walked to the door. I opened it only part way, keeping the security chain engaged. He was standing there, his face a mask of thunderous rage. He was still tanned from the cruise, which made his anger seem even more grotesque. "Mom, we need to talk," he bit out, his voice low and menacing. He tried to push the door open, but the chain held firm. "Let me in." "We can talk right here," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. His eyes widened in disbelief. He was not used to being denied entry into my home. "What the hell is this? The silent treatment? The chain on the door? Are you a prisoner in your own home?" "No, Ethan," I replied calmly. "I'm the warden. And you are no longer an approved visitor." The color drained from his face, replaced by a splotchy red anger. "This is because of the $6,000, isn't it? You're punishing me because I asked for a loan. I told you I'd pay it back." "No," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "It's because of the $62,300. The money you took over 8 years and never paid back a single cent of. It's because you swore on your father's memory to repay $20,000 and then used it to take your wife's parents on a luxury cruise. A cruise you lied to my face about, pretending you had canceled it for financial reasons." I watched his face as I spoke. The anger faltered, replaced by a flicker of genuine shock. He was stunned that I knew. He was stunned that I had kept track. He had underestimated me so completely, for so long, that the idea of me possessing a memory, a spreadsheet, and a spine was utterly alien to him. He recovered quickly, falling back on his default setting, blame-shifting. "Jessica. She was the one who posted the pictures. I told her not to. I knew you'd overreact." "Don't you dare blame her," I shot back, my voice rising for the first time. "You were the one who called me. You were the one who fed me the story about the canceled trip. You stood right there," I pointed at the hallway, "and lied to me. Both of you are culpable. Both of you are thieves." "Thieves," he sputtered, aghast. "We are your family. That money was for the kids, for emergencies." "Was the salsa dancing class on the Lido deck an emergency?" I asked, my voice dripping with ice. "Was the $400 jet ski rental a necessity for the children's well-being? Was the lobster dinner part of your maintaining stability plan?" He stared at me speechless. I had the details. He had no idea how thoroughly I had documented his betrayal. The power dynamic had shifted so completely, so irrevocably, that he was left sputtering, his usual arsenal of manipulative tactics rendered useless against the cold, hard facts. Finally, he found his voice, and it was laced with venom. "You're going to regret this," he snarled. "You're going to end up a bitter, lonely old woman. And when you need help, when you're sick and can't take care of yourself, don't come crawling to me." It was his last, desperate shot, the ultimate threat he had held over me for years, the fear of a lonely, helpless old age. But it no longer worked. The fear had been burned out of me. "I am already alone, Ethan," I said, my voice softening now, filled with a deep, profound sadness for the son I had lost. "I have been alone for years. The only difference is that now my solitude doesn't cost me $8,000 a year. Now, get off my property." He looked at me for a long moment, searching my face for any sign of weakness, any crack in my resolve. He found none. He saw a stranger, a woman he didn't recognize, a queen in her fortress. With a final, disgusted shake of his head, he turned and stormed off toward the elevator. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer," he yelled over his shoulder. The threat was so absurd, so pathetic, that I almost laughed. I closed the door, slid the deadbolt, and leaned against it, my body trembling with the adrenaline of the confrontation. I had done it. I had faced the dragon, and I had not backed down. A wave of exhaustion washed over me, followed by an incredible, liberating sense of peace. That afternoon, Helen came over with a bottle of champagne. "To the Queen," she said, raising her glass. We didn't talk about Ethan. We talked about the future. We talked about my list of wants. We talked about Italy. That evening, I sat down at my computer, not to check my bank balance or document betrayals, but to book a flight. I found a 10-day guided tour of Italy, Rome, Florence, Venice. It was expensive, but for the first time, the price didn't fill me with guilt. I looked at the total, $500, and I thought of the $62,300. This trip wasn't an expense. It was a refund. It was the first down payment on the life I was reclaiming. I entered my credit card information, the one linked to my new secret account, and I clicked confirm. The booking confirmation email that appeared in my inbox was more than just a travel itinerary. It was a birth certificate. It was the official documentation of the day Sarah Payne was reborn. The 6 weeks leading up to my trip to Italy were a period of exhilarating rebirth. It was as if I was seeing the world in color for the first time after a lifetime of living in shades of gray. I went shopping and bought a new suitcase, bright red, a stark contrast to the drab, sensible luggage I'd owned for decades. I bought clothes for the trip, a flowy linen dress in a vibrant shade of mustard yellow, a comfortable pair of walking shoes, a silk scarf printed with a map of Florence. Each purchase was a small act of defiance against the frugal, self-denying woman I had been. Each item was chosen not for its utility, but for the joy it sparked in me. There was no word from Ethan. The lawyer he threatened never materialized, a final, empty bluff. The silence from their side of the world was absolute. It was as if, once they realized the bank was truly and permanently closed, I had ceased to exist for them. The silence, which I had once feared above all else, was now a welcome gift, a peaceful quiet that allowed me to hear my own thoughts for the first time in years. 2 weeks before my departure, an unexpected email appeared in my inbox. The sender was David Miller, Jessica's father. My finger hovered over the delete button, but curiosity got the better of me. The message was brief and formal. "Dear Sarah," it read, "I was recently made aware of the full circumstances surrounding the family cruise and your subsequent estrangement from Ethan and my daughter. I want to be clear that had Karen and I known they had lied to you, we would never have accepted their invitation. What they did was inexcusable and morally wrong. They owe you an apology I suspect you will never receive. So, on behalf of my wife and myself, please accept ours. We have informed Jessica that we will no longer be complicit in their financial deceptions. I wish you nothing but the best. Sincerely, David Miller." I read the email 3 times. A man I barely knew, my daughter-in-law's father, had shown more integrity and decency than my own son. It was a sad, bitter irony, but it also brought a strange sense of validation. I wasn't crazy. My pain was real, and even outsiders could see the injustice of it. I replied simply, "Thank you, David. I appreciate your words." The night before my trip, another surprise. A call from an unknown number. I answered cautiously. "Grandma?" The voice was hesitant. It was Noah. My heart constricted. I braced myself for a guilt trip, a plea on behalf of his parents. But his words stunned me. "Grandma, I wanted to apologize," he said, his voice cracking. "I heard my parents arguing. I know what they did. About the cruise, about the money. All of it. I've been quiet for years, and I shouldn't have been. I'm sorry." I sat on the edge of my bed, the red suitcase open beside me, and listened as my 21-year-old grandson showed more maturity than his 40-year-old father. "They're in a bad way, Grandma," he continued. "They had to sell Mom's SUV. They're panicking. But that's not your problem. They made this mess. I'm calling because I don't want to lose you. I'd like to have a relationship with you, separate from them if you'd be willing." Tears streamed down my face, but for the first time in a long time, they were not tears of pain. They were tears of hope. I would like that very much, Noah, I whispered. Thank you for calling. It means the world to me. Have a great trip, he said. You deserve it more than anyone. We hung up, and I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The cycle could be broken. The toxicity did not have to pass down through the generations. Italy was everything I had dreamed of and more. It wasn't just a vacation, it was a pilgrimage. A journey back to myself. I stood before Michelangelo's David in Florence and wept, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming power of human creation. I ate gelato by the Trevi Fountain in Rome and laughed with pure, unadulterated joy. I rode a gondola through the canals of Venice and felt a sense of wonder I thought had died with Robert. I traveled with a tour group of strangers who quickly became friends. We were all of similar age, people who had lived full lives and were now seeking new adventures. I told them my story one night over dinner and a bottle of Chianti. I did not tell it for sympathy, but as a testimony. When I finished, a woman from Australia raised her glass. To Sarah, she said, and to all of us who are learning, no matter how late in life, that the most important investment we can ever make is in ourselves. The flight home was a mirror image of my departure. I left a ghost and returned a fully realized person. Helen was at the airport to meet me, and when she saw me, she threw her arms around me. You're glowing, she said. You look 10 years younger. I feel it, I replied. I feel like I've finally started living. A month after my return, a plain brown box appeared outside my apartment door. Inside was a collection of my old birthday cards to Ethan, some faded photos, and a cashier's check for $5,000. There was also a letter, in his familiar, slanted handwriting. He apologized. He didn't make excuses. He took full responsibility. He admitted to the lies, the manipulation, the entitlement. He wrote that losing the SUV and facing real financial consequences had been a brutal but necessary wake-up call. He was in therapy. He and Jessica were in counseling. He was starting to understand the damage he had done. This check is the first payment, he wrote. I know it's a drop in the ocean of the $62,300 I owe you. But I will pay it all back. Not because I expect you to forgive me, but because it's the right thing to do. I love you, Mom. I am so sorry. I didn't cash the check. But every month, like clockwork, a new check would arrive in the mail. I put them all in a drawer untouched. The money didn't matter anymore. It was the act, the consistency, the proof of a change that mattered. My relationship with Ethan is a quiet, careful thing now. We see each other occasionally, for coffee in a neutral public place. The old dynamic is gone, replaced by a fragile, tentative respect. The warmth may never fully return, and I have accepted that. Some things, once broken, can never be perfectly mended. But Noah and I have built something new and wonderful. He visits me every week. He tells me about his classes, his job, his dreams. He asks me about my life, about Robert, about the woman I was before I became just grandma. Through him, I feel a connection to my family that is real and untainted by money. Today, 2 years after I saw those cruise photos, my life is full. My balcony garden is thriving. My painting class has filled my walls with colorful, amateurish canvases that make me smile. Helen and I are planning our next trip, a cruise to Alaska. It's my treat. I have learned that true wealth has nothing to do with the numbers in a bank account. It's about the richness of your experiences, the strength of your boundaries, and the depth of your self-love. I didn't lose $62,300. I paid a hefty tuition fee to the University of Life. And the lesson I learned was priceless. It is never, ever too late to become the hero of your own story.